Hi, I'm Kate. I'm one of the senior consultants at Method Recruitment. Most of you probably already know me because I emailed you, but I look after software development recruitment. And super excited for today. I've been running these webinars at the start of COVID just as like a knowledge sharing, and we're super lucky to have Andrew on board. A lot of you guys probably already know Andrew from Meetup Scene, which is actually where we met and around the place. Just letting a few more people in. This is actually, I'm super excited, a record number of people registered for one of our Method webinars. So we're expecting quite a few, which means I totally get it if you want to have your video off so you can eat your lunch. But also, I'm super sure that Andrew probably wants to see you guys nodding along. So if you can, please keep your videos on. Couple of disclaimers first of all. This is being recorded. If you don't like that, just email me afterwards. And anything that Andrew says is not reflective of his employer as well. So I'll go into a little bit of a bio about Andrew if you don't know him. Andrew has a lot of experience in software development, started out as a developer and moved into development manager roles, and has quite extensive experience in leadership training as well. So he's got a specialist focus on tech because that's his background. So his main focus is how we can become better technical leaders and developers by focusing on learning the skills most of us ignore: communication and leadership skills. So I will pass over to you, Andrew.
Oh, thank you, Kate. That was a very quick intro. I see lots of people who I recognise here. This is great. It's really fun to meet people everywhere and then all come together and talk about things. So thank you for that opportunity, Kate. So, as Kate said, my background history is software developer. So I first started writing code when I was 8 years old. I started using a ZX Spectrum. Has anybody ever seen a ZX Spectrum before or used one? Yeah, they're great devices that allow you to plug into a television and write code. And I just got so fascinated by technology. It just had to become my career. So I went to university to study software development and became a practicing software developer. This event today is going to be pretty much about leadership skills. And it's going to be as much of a Q&A as I can make it. I don't want to hold the stage for the whole time that we're here. So please, if you have questions for me, if there's particular circumstances you want to talk about, if there's particular parts of some of the stories that I'm going to tell you, please write them in the chat box, and Kate will be curating those and interrupting me if you don't want to interrupt me yourself to answer the questions, to ask me the questions which I'll answer. Like I said earlier, my journey in technology started very, very early, but so did my journey in leadership. Because I was such a geek as a child, and because I got into technology so very, very, very early, the same thing happened to me that I'm sure happened to quite a lot of people in technology, and probably to quite a lot of people in this room. Which is because I was a very good software developer, the company that I worked for decided it would be a really good idea to make me the leader of my team. So at the ripe old age of 21 years old, I was put in charge of a team of 5 software developers. This is somebody who not only doesn't really understand what it means to be a software developer in industry, I don't even really understand at this point what it means to be an employee, and I certainly don't understand what it means to be a leader. So I'm kind of thrust into this leadership journey before I am ready, at age 21 years old, leading a team. And luckily for me, my boss at the time, who became my very, very, very first mentor, pulled me into a room and said to me words which to this day give me chills when I think about them. He pulled me into this room and said, "Andrew, what's your job?" I can feel it. I can feel the chills now. When your boss asks you what your job is, that's something which makes you a little bit nervous and makes you a little bit kind of, Why are they asking me this question? So my boss, after a month of leading this team, pulled me in and asked me that. And I thought to myself for a few minutes, and I said, to write code. And he said, no. Think about it. What's your job? This is me leading a team of people. So I thought about it. Okay, I'm a leader. So my job isn't to write code. To write really good code? No. And I thought about it again. And I suddenly realized that I'd been leading this team of people, and I didn't even know what that meant. I didn't know what the job of a leader was. And it made me scared. It made me worried. It made me concerned. And not only that, I had to say that to my boss. I had to say to my boss, who promoted me into this position, that I didn't know why he promoted me and what I was meant to be doing in that job. And that was first of all, supremely scary thing to do, but also a really profound thing that shaped the rest of my career. Because luckily for me, this was why my boss had pulled me into this room. Not to shout at me and scream at me as to why I wasn't doing my job, but to help me realize that, first of all, I didn't know what the job of a leader was, but secondly, to help me learn what that meant. And so luckily for me, that ended up being a pivotal point in my career where he invested in me and taught me what it meant to be a leader. And that started a career-long obsession with learning these skills, of learning how to be a leader, of learning how to communicate, how to bring the business and the technology together, because ultimately that's what the job of a leader is bringing those things together and joining those two parts of the business. So that was my first leadership experience. And I'd love to tell you that I learned all my lessons and everything was perfect from that point onwards. But I said I had two stories to tell you. And so you can probably guess that I didn't. And I made some more mistakes along the way. And the second leadership mistake I want to share before we get into the Q&A section is about a time and a company that I worked for where I ended up having to wear a little paper hat on my head every time I wanted to take a lunch break. And the reason for that is because I would start having my lunch breaks and people would be speaking to me the whole lunch break and saying, Andrew, can you help me with this? Andrew, can you help me with that? Andrew, I need help. Andrew, what's this? How do I do this? How do I do that? And to get some peace and quiet, I had one of the guys in my team, she made me a paper hat to put on my head that said, Andrew is on lunch, stop bothering me. And I thought that was an acceptable solution to this problem because I didn't understand that that was the surface problem. The surface problem was that I wasn't being able to have my lunch break. But the actual problem was that I had unknowingly become the nexus of all knowledge in that team. Because I was trying to help everybody in that team, because I was trying to be the person who answered everybody's questions, I wasn't empowering them to answer their own questions. And so they came to me with problems and not solutions because I hadn't empowered them to come to me with solutions. And I didn't realize that at the time. And again, I had a very profound experience where a leader of mine helped me understand that and helped me through that, understanding that my job as a leader wasn't to answer everybody's question, but it was to give them the skills, to give them the framework, and to give them the authority, the expertise to do that themselves, to empower them to get the answers to those questions themselves. So these two things, these two leadership experiences, both very, very early in my career, gave me this desire, this hunger to focus on learning these skills. Because I think, just as happened with me, we quite often get thrust into leadership before we're ready in our industry. We tend to promote the best technology individuals, the people who are the best individual contributors into leadership positions. And then quite often, as I've observed throughout my career, we sit back and watch as they fail and wonder why they fail. And everybody at every level knows things aren't working out. The person themselves feels like they're not doing a good job. The boss above them that promoted them feels like they're not doing a good job. And the people under them feel like they're not doing a good job. And yet we don't stop as an industry and go, let's do something about this. That's why I'm really, really, really excited for doing these kinds of things, because it's, as you can tell, it's a passion of mine, and I really want to solicit questions, stories. People, please share, as I've shared my stories, share your stories. Anything you want to know in terms of leadership skills, in terms of what it means to be a leader, in terms of the skills that you need. Some of the typical questions I get asked are, how do I keep doing my job while I'm a leader? How do I keep writing the code, keep configuring the servers while I'm a leader? It's a very common question. Other questions I get asked are, I'm not feeling value in my leadership role. I don't feel like I'm producing. What do I do about that? So any questions you've got about that, please ask them. I'm going to pause, take a sip of water while we wait for that.
We've got one from Hiran, actually. If you wanted to ask your question, Hiran.
Yeah, definitely. My question is regarding, I have faced this situation quite a lot when people, ask me a lot of questions. I always try to answer them. I feel the same thing as well, about not producing good value for yourself, what you are supposed to do. But other thing, right now, the question what I have is like, if you stop answering, don't you feel like, don't you appear like someone who doesn't really want to help? And you internally, you feel that you really want to help, but you don't know how to make sure that, they actually, people answer their questions or find answer to their questions by doing a lot more due diligence than just taking that easier option and coming to you.
Sure. So thank you for that. It's a really, really good question. So there's two different things. There's not answering the question and not helping them. And those are two fundamentally different things. You can not answer the question and still help. And the way you do that is by guiding them in the direction of where they need to go. So for example, somebody comes to you asking you a very, very specific question. Instead of giving them a very, very specific answer, you can try and coach them to get the answer themselves. So, asking them questions about the subject to get them to think about it, to ask them questions about, where could you find out this information? Who could you speak to? Where could you go? So you're still helping and guide them to get to where the answer is, but you're not giving them it on a silver platter. The analogy that I use with this, and I'm not sure if this translates to Australia, so I'm going to have to watch people's faces. There was a Oxfam advert in the UK about the difference between giving a man a fish and teaching him how to fish. You give a man a fish and he can eat for a day. You teach him how to fish and he can eat for a lifetime. It's those same kinds of things with this particular subject. If we hand people the fish of knowledge, I love that phrase. I'm going to use that from now on. It's the fish of knowledge. If you hand them the fish of knowledge, then you're not helping them, answer their own questions in the future. But if you teach them how to do their own research, think about the problem, find where that information is, then A, you get your own time back, and B, you're making them more self-sufficient in the future. So you are helping them. You're just helping them by getting them to help themselves.
Cool. We've got one from Marwan.
Cool. Do you want to ask your question, Marwan?
Hi, yes. My question was that, like most of us here probably, is that I love coding. I really like being on the tools, staying up late, maybe waking up early, just getting into a problem and solving a long-term, issue. But naturally, that stuff, you start getting less opportunity to do that as you move into leadership roles. How did you come to terms with that, so to speak? And, you know, were you finding that you were losing some of that value in your job?
Sure. Yeah, I love writing code. I still love writing code. I think, you know, from doing it for well over 2.5 decades, I don't think that passion's ever going to go away. But I think it's important to kind of take a step back and ask, what does the organization value you as, and what do you value yourself as? Because they're both important questions to ask. And really holistically, when you make that step into leadership, the company, you know, your boss, your employer, aren't looking at your own individual contributions to kind of look at your success as a leader. They're looking at what you do to your team. So that's the first thing is, you know, if you yourself made yourself twice as productive, you know, if you suddenly, instead of working 8 hours a day, work 16 hours a day, and let's just say magically that meant you could produce twice the output. We know that's not possible, but let's just stay with a hypothetical. So you've now basically doubled your output. So if you've got a team of 10 people, you've added one more person to it by breaking your back by working twice as much. If being a leader and focusing on the group output of your team, if you make everybody in your team 10% more efficient, you've now added the equivalent of a man to your team. And nobody is breaking their back and nobody is working 16-hour days. So from the organization's point of view, when we make this move into leadership, it's not just about thinking about your own individual output and your own individual contributions. It's about the holistic, how you're improving the output of your team. And that's what people look for those kind of promotions and those kinds of progressions. On your side, on your personal side, this is hard. This is one of the hardest things in moving into leadership, and I don't want to downplay this at all, because it was something that I struggled with, and it's something that a lot of people will struggle with. If we think about when we're junior, and I'm aware that not everybody here is potentially a software developer, and the analogies that I'm going to use are software development. So if any of these aren't landing, please let me know and I'll try and find another one. But if you think about if you're a junior engineer, then the work you're doing is you're writing code and you're happy if your code compiles. The feedback time is in seconds. Hit that compile button, code compiles, feel good about myself. You then become a bit more of a mid-level engineer and you're kind of thinking in terms of projects. And so maybe you've got to wait a few days before you get that feedback on if you're doing a good job. Then you become a senior engineer and now you're doing a little bit of coaching. You're maybe managing clients a little bit. So now you've got to wait weeks, maybe even months to know if you're doing a good job, because the feedback on coaching somebody takes a very, very long time. Then you move into a leadership position and you're looking at building teams. And now, how do you know if you built a good team? Wait a few months and find out. You move into executives. Now you're looking about building teams of teams, about building strategy, about looking at how this company is going to succeed in the future. How do you know if you've done a good job? Wait a few years and find out. Every time we move up in an organization, the time horizon between the work that we do and our feedback on if we're doing a good job gets longer and longer and longer and longer. And that is really hard to deal with when we're used to getting this immediate feedback. So part of it is being happy with that uncertainty. When you move into leadership, we're not dealing with code anymore. We're dealing with people and structures and businesses, and things don't have right and wrong answers most of the time. Most of the time, the route to go, the path to take is not clear, and we've got to be fine with a certain amount of uncertainty and a certain amount of time between the feedback for our actions. If we're looking in the short term and we're wanting feedback in the short term, then looking at the impact we're having on the people around us is the best way to do that. How happy is your team? How productive is your team? That can help you feel that. But I'm sorry to say that moving into leadership is about becoming comfortable with a certain amount of uncertainty and a certain amount of delay in feedback of your actions. It's part of the job.
Some instant feedback. Everyone is loving your analogies here in the comments.
Good.
We've got one from Daryl.
How you doing, Andrew?
Hello.
I just have a question because I'm actually relatively new to this whole tech lead thing. I've only been a tech lead for about 2 months. So one of the things that I was brought in to this company for was to try and push more innovation. Okay, so a lot of things they were doing were very traditional web server type technology, stuff like that. One of my challenges I've been having is that I've had difficulty trying to get developers to embrace more of an innovation idea. And I just wanted to get some insight into how I can try and help motivate or push that along, because that's probably one of the major reasons why I was hired in this position. So is there any kind of advice you can give me in something like that?
Sure, thank you for sharing that. This is probably, obviously this is something we could spend an hour on talking in depth, but in terms of some very specific pointers, I'd be doing a very deep searching time thinking about where their resistance could be coming from, and I'd be getting all of that down on paper. The next thing I'd be doing is I'd be thinking to try and work out the things that they care about the most. So the best way to change somebody's behavior is to link the thing that they want with the thing that you want. So for example, if what they want is to try the latest technologies, easy. If what they want is stability, maybe a little bit harder, but we can find ways to get there. Like, are there negative things that are happening at the moment? For example, is the infrastructure, and you don't have to answer this now, is the current way of doing the infrastructure causing them to have a lot of support calls? In which case you can tie their desire to not have weekend support calls with an upgrade in infrastructure. I'd be trying to work out the things that they want, the things that they don't want, and how you can align those with the things that you want.
Yeah, so for me, it's been more around the cost of infrastructure is probably one of the major things I've identified. And I have actually sat down with each of them individually and gone, what are you passionate about? And they've given me a list of things, but I haven't been able to necessarily find or correlate like a way to marry that together. So maybe I just need to continue to try and see how I can get that to work. But I appreciate the advice anyway.
No, it's fine. It is hard, and it does take time. Like, I think the thing with a lot of these skills and these techniques is it's like any skill. It's hard, and it takes practice, and it takes dedication. If just off the top of my head, and I don't want to derail this conversation too much, but if cost is a driver, is there a way to tie that into them? Is there a way where you could say, look, if we were spending less money on this, we could spend more money on that, et cetera, et cetera. That's just an idea I thought of. If you want to talk about this specifically, hit me up afterwards on LinkedIn, and we'll bounce some ideas off each other.
Okay, cool. Sounds great. Thanks.
Michael had a similar question. Does that answer it for you, or did you want to elaborate in a different area?
So yeah, I had a pretty similar question, I suppose, just about innovation, and I guess, like, is there any tips for, like, I guess, encouraging innovation in a team? Potentially, like, you might be in a team that everyone's not really that interested in innovation, but like as a team, that's sort of an output that, like, the manager, whoever wants. Yeah, I mean, I understand that's kind of the same question, but
that's fine. I think one of the things with this is the next question. Like, if we were one-on-one coaching this, and I was to kind of be helping you delve into this, I'd start off by kind of digging into why the innovation's wanted in the first place. Because innovation isn't an outcome; innovation is a strategy. So, what outcome does the business want from that innovation, and is there a way to tie that into what the developers want?
Can I just jump in? I'll kind of answer that question from my perspective. Mine was more to do with lowering costs of having to run servers that are just kind of idle and don't do much. So my innovation was more about getting to use, say, microservice technology, where the cost is based on the amount of CPU used rather than servers are sitting in idle. So that was kind of the reason why we'll go down this direction, and why I wanted to try and motivate my team to try and think more like that. That's why I asked the question.
Sure. Thanks, Darryl. But yeah, I guess the same to you, Michael. Maybe have a think about the reasons behind the innovation. What does the business want to get from that, and how can that be aligned with what the development team want? So an example could be, like we said, cost savings, or can that cost be spent elsewhere? An example could be, not working with older technologies and being able to try and experiment with new things. This could be what things the dev wants. Where's that line drawn between those two things? If there is legitimately no way, then you're in a really, really hard place. This has only ever happened once or twice in my career, where what the business wants does not align with the objectives of the team. It is honestly exceedingly rare. Most of the time, you can find a way to draw the line between the two. It will just be hard, and it will take a lot of time. And again, I'm sorry to say, that's part of the job.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah. I guess in the situation I'm thinking about, it's kind of like, it's not like anyone is not necessarily wanting to be innovative. It's more like I think the strategy is that it's sort of more like an R&D team in some ways.
Sure.
So
they want to be innovative, but they're not.
Yeah.
They're not practical. Okay.
Well, maybe they are, but maybe just like I'm saying, do you have any tips for kind of
Sure.
enhancing that in a team, for example?
Okay. So that's a slightly different. If they want to be innovative, but you're not really getting the output you want, then we've got to kind of look at the reasons why you're not getting that outcome. That could be things like they don't feel like they've had all of the shackles removed, and they still feel like they're being restricted by something. So what are the things that are holding them back? Is it the fact that they still feel like they've got to produce business, short-term business outcomes? In which case you've got to make that clear. Is it the fact that they don't have the mental capacity to do it because they're working so hard throughout the rest of the time? Then maybe it's a matter of blocking off a certain amount of time to say, okay, this is innovation time. There's techniques there where you can have ideation sessions, whiteboard sessions, internal hackathons, where you're basically dedicating this time to, we are going to be creative in this time, and nothing impinges on that. If you're a small enough team, you might need to have one person who's on call for that, but most of the time you can dedicate that section.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's really useful. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Kevin's got a tricky one to throw at you.
Oh, I love tricky ones.
Well, I think it's tricky. Maybe it's not.
Do you want to ask your question, Kevin? Or should we read it out?
Hi. Yeah, my question was, how do you balance growing team skill, confidence, and productivity with the need for immediate outcomes?
Oh, so this is one of the things that is always going to be a pain point, a struggle, something you've got to balance, because it's the age-old question of, do we focus on being reactive or do we focus on being proactive? Because if all we ever do is focus on being reactive, then we're not improving the way we do things. If all we ever do is focus on being proactive, then we're never actually producing any outcomes. So there's always going to be a balance there. And the first thing I would say is that balance is always going to change. There will be times within the year, within the month, within the sprint, within the project, where that needle shifts from one to the other. And it's our jobs as leaders to recognize when and where we should invest, and when and where we should be reactive. Because it's never one or the other. In terms of how you make that decision, I encourage everybody to do a team roadmap. In the same way as we have a product roadmap, let's have a team roadmap. Let's treat developing our team in the same way we develop our software. So we use Agile. We have a backlog. We have sprints. We have a burn down chart. We have these concepts already for developing software. Why can we not use the same concepts for developing people? Let's have a backlog of the skills, the ideas, the concepts we want to teach our team, and let's look at how we fit them into the development roadmap of our team. And depending on what the demands are in other areas, and it's your job as a leader to balance those, we can fit these into our sprint, into our roadmap, into what we're doing this particular development period, the right balance between software and team development. It's your job as a leader to convince your boss that this is the right investment, which means you've got to have a realistic understanding of what the return on that investment is as much as you can. So again, in the same way as when we're looking at features for product, we go, what's the investment that's involved? Is this a discrete piece of work or a continuous piece of work? What's the likely return on that investment? Just as we do all of that for feature development for software, we can do exactly the same thing with team development for our team. We can say, it's going to cost this much of time, this much of money, and I feel like this is the return. And if your boss ever says to you, well, how do you quantify and justify that return? Then the answer is, how do you do that with features? You never really know. You just make the best guess that you can. Again, you've got to learn to deal with a little bit of uncertainty. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great.
Cool. Thanks, Kevin.
Quick one from Alex. Alex Watts.
Hey guys, yes, you're talking about innovation time. I guess I am in a company where they're a bit hesitant to innovate. So I'm not in a tech lead role, I'm in a senior role. But how do I sell to the company to potentially explore other innovative technologies such as cloud tech or something else that is, the big fancy buzzword these days?
Sure. I'm going to derail the conversation a little bit, and I'll come back to it, because you said the words just then, I'm not in a leadership role, I'm in a senior role. I'm going to disagree with you fundamentally. You are in a leadership role. Whenever any part of what you're doing is not producing immediate outcomes in terms of writing code, you're in a leadership role. And even when part of what you're doing is that, you may still be in a leadership role because you may be developing frameworks and techniques that the rest of the team uses. So you are in a leadership role. Just because you don't have the word leader in your job title doesn't make it not part of what you should be doing. And having that mentality of leadership isn't a job title is going to help you with this particular issue, because it's incumbent upon all of us that want to make what we do better to take that leadership mindset, irrespective of what our job title says. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, in terms of selling innovation, I'm going to go right back to what we were just talking about with Darryl and Michael, of whenever we're thinking about influencing people, and that's what we're doing here, we're influencing people, we've got to draw the two things together. We've got to draw what the business wants with what we want. So why do you want to innovate? You want to innovate because you see cost savings, you see time savings, you see stability improvements, you see retention in terms of keeping the team, you see hiring in terms of hiring new people. Like, again, innovation isn't an outcome. Innovation is a strategy. So what is the outcome that you want from innovation, and what outcome can that strategy give the business? So that's what I'd be saying is, you can separate the same strategy of innovation can have different outcomes for different people. For you, the strategy could be reducing your support calls. It could be keeping your team engaged to keep their productivity up. For the business, it could be retention. If people aren't engaged, they're going to leave. It could be improved productivity. It could be decreased cost. So again, innovation is a strategy, not an outcome. What are the outcomes that you want, and how do they align?
Cool, thanks. It was good to think about it from the business perspective. I guess I was always thinking about it from a tech point of view.
Yeah, it's honestly very, very common to do that, because we're so focused on the things that we want to get out of something, we forget that we've got to sell this kind of stuff to the business. And that I use that word very, very specifically, because at the end of the day, it is a sell. We've got to think about what are the benefits of what we want to the wider business, not the feature of what it is.
Cool.
Thanks, Alex.
Nicholas, you're up next.
Hi. So from the perspective as just an ordinary developer on the team, if you feel that you're working with a team lead that doesn't really display those leadership qualities and provide the support that you've been talking about, what's a good way that you as just an ordinary member of the team can approach that and work with them?
Oh, interesting question. So everybody is not ordinary. Everybody is special in their own way. So you're not an ordinary dev. You're an exceptional dev. You're exceptional in your own way. That's the first point. Second point, this is super common. Again, I hold my hand up as being one of those people who was promoted into leadership and not shown the way in the beginning. So the first place I'd start this from is empathy. This person, first of all, might not know that they're not doing what you would think of as the best job. So don't be angry and upset with them, would be my first point. See it as an opportunity to practice your own leadership skills. See it as an opportunity to work with them, to manage up and lead up into them, to help them see what they need to do. It's going to be hard. Managing up is always so much a harder job. But again, it's skills that if you aspire to leadership, it's skills that you've got to learn. Quite often, a lot of our job is managing up, as well as managing to the side, as opposed to managing down. And so managing up is really important skills to learn. So here I would encourage starting with empathy, trying to understand, trying to work out from their point of view, do they think they're doing a bad job? And again, trying to find which things are they being motivated by, which things are they being measured by, and how you can help them increase those by also getting the things that you want. So, for example, if they're being measured on, and I really, really encourage anybody not to measure people on this. This is a terrible measure, but so many people do it. Number of features released to production. If that's what they're being measured on, again, terrible idea. Find ways in your suggestions, in the things that you would like them to do, find ways that your suggestions help improve the metrics that they're being measured by. Does that help?
Yep, definitely. Thanks.
You're welcome, Nicholas. Cool. I think, have we got the next question?
Yeah, this is never going to end. Ferenc Filoni.
Ferenc, hi. Oh, I think you're muted, Ferenc. I know Ferenc very well. Ferenc attends my CTO school lunchtime events, which you are all welcome and invited to. If you look on Melbourne CTO school on meetup.com, we run monthly lunchtime events where we get together and talk about technology leadership. Do you want me to read it out, Ferenc, if you're having problems with audio? Yeah, cool. Okay, so how do you balance reaching a goal between quality and cost for the business? So this is where we get back to time horizons. And what time horizon are we talking about here? Because there are legitimately times when we've got to get something out of the door because the return on that investment is worth the downsides. There are other times when we've got to take a longer play and we've got to focus on quality because the long-term investment is worth it. So to give you an example of this, there was a project that I'm working on at the moment where we've got to get something out the door. And I say it very specifically that way because it's going to mean that we get a huge amount of money if we get it out the door tomorrow. As opposed to if we wait 6 months, what's the cost of delay of waiting 6 months? So you can take these as a mathematical formula and say, okay, well, getting it out tomorrow, in inverted commas, means that we've got an increase in cash of this much, but we're going to have to pay down that tech debt and we're going to have to invest improving that quality over the next 6 months. So that it's going to cost the business this much. So we've got a revenue and we've got a cost. Then you can say, okay, well, what if we delayed by 6 months, built it right? What would the cost to the business be, and what would the revenue to the business be? And that to me would be a very, very easy mathematical question then, because we would go, which one of those gives us the better return? If it's not clear and not obvious, then you can start adding in some subjective parts to this, like How does the team feel? How does the customer feel? You know, are we going to, if we delay by 6 months to build it right, are we going to disadvantage our relationship with the customer to the point where they're going to leave us? So I would always be looking at it from that point of view, there's always a cost to delay, always a cost to delay, even if it's only the salaries of the people that you're paying to do that. So what is that cost to delay? And is that worth the cost to get it out quicker or not?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Just got my microphone back.
Thanks, Frank.
So basically the actual scenario and experience that I wanted to bring up is that when it meets with innovation, and I see that many questions is about innovation too, that the conflict that I used to face is that the people, your team, your development team doesn't always understand the difference between making feasibility or product development, where the quality is quite different and the goal is different for the business value and the business value driven development. It's very important. So basically, as a leader, how do you actually get it explained to the people to understand what is the requirement for the quality that they're doing? Because it leads actually a conflict between you and the team about understanding.
Yeah. So this is a lot of these skills we're talking about, a lot of these solutions to these things are all around communication skills. They're all around influence skills. They're all around our ability to explain something, to influence, to guide people, to understand something in a different way to the way that they understand it. And these are all skills which, as a leader, we've got to focus on improving, because they become more and more a part of our role as we progress in leadership. So, you know, when you're a junior engineer, the focus on your communication skills is very small. When you become a senior, it gets even bigger. When you become a leader, it gets even bigger. So that's not to say that, you know, these aren't hard things to learn. They are hard things to learn, but they're worth investing in if you're taking that step into leadership. So in terms of this particular issue, here it's all about getting them to understand that, which is about investing time into that relationship, investing time into explaining it. And one of the important things to remember here is that each person in your team might be influenced differently. So one particular way of explaining this might not work for the whole group. There are kind of like, I don't particularly like models and, you know, ways of thinking about things, but fundamentally you can kind of think about it as some people are influenced by passion, some people are influenced by logic, some people are influenced by authority. Like they're not the only groups, but, you know, I'll use them as my explanatory model in this. You know, if you've got somebody that's influenced by authority, then finding other people that person respects, or the companies that person respects that do the same thing, can help influence them. If they're influenced by, you know, logic, then sitting down and basically just doing what I did a minute ago, going, you know, you've got this amount of cash income here, this amount of reduction here, blah, 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 logic, outcome. But if you sit in a room of 5 people, chances are that not all 5 of them are going to be influenced by the same thing. And you could sit there and do all the different explanations to everybody in that room, but you're going to be constantly losing and gaining people as you go along. So a general piece of advice when we're looking at influencing a group is to not. When you're looking at influencing a group, I would always start with individual influence and then group influence. So the people to focus on first are the leaders, the thought leaders in the group. Interestingly, the thought leaders might not be, just as we were saying before, might not be the people who have leader in their job title. The best way to find out who the thought leader of a software development group is to wait till production breaks and then see who people turn to look at. Literally, who do they turn in their chair and look at? Oh my God, production's down. Let's speak to Jessica. They're the people who lead the thought frame in the group. And those are the people to influence. Because those are the people who, when you're in that group setting, they're going to be looking at and seeing, is Jessica on board with this? Does Jessica understand, and is Jessica okay with this? Because if Jessica's okay, I'm okay, and I don't need to worry. I might not understand, but thumbs up, I'm okay with this. So never influence a group. Start with who the thought leaders are, identify who the thought leaders are, one-on-one influence them first, then get in the group with everybody. Does that help? Cool, thanks Frank. I'll have a sip of water.
We've got Marcel has a
Ooh.
question.
Marcel.
Hi, Andrew.
Hello.
You mentioned before thinking of developers like software that needs to be developed. So I'm just wondering what tools, frameworks, ideas, methodologies that you would use or recommend for enhancing your development of developers within your team.
Sure. Don't go too complex. Use the tools you already know. If you use Jira for managing your product backlog, use it for managing your skills backlog. It's not necessarily important that there's this all singing, all dancing software that does everything. It's more important, certainly, that we just apply a process to it, that we're thinking about it, we're making it part of what we're doing. That's the most important first step. And to make sure that that becomes an intrinsic way of the way we go about things, that it becomes a habit, it becomes part of our modus operandi, let's use the tools that we already know how to use. Once it becomes part of what you're doing, once it becomes something that you do naturally, then you can look at tweaking around the edges. But getting that 80% of actually doing it and making it part of the process is the most important first step. And using the tools you already know will reduce the barrier to entry for doing that. Cool.
Thanks.
Oh, we've got about 10 minutes left. If anyone has any...
So quickly.
I know. Any other examples or any other... I know there's definitely some managers on the call as well. If you had any challenges that you've worked through that you wanted to share that could enlighten us, please feel free. Got another quick one from Hiran as well.
Go, Hiran, go.
I think I'm really influenced by this talk, and the thing which I'm really right now thinking is like, how do I find people or find leaders and be in company of them who are really ready to impart their skills, their knowledge with people working with them. How do you find people like that?
Sure. Anybody who's looking at moving a job, the first thing I would recommend is, make sure that you're speaking to people who understand exactly what you want from that. And if part of what you want is to make sure you're supported, to make sure that you have people around you, then making that clear during your job search. So, people like Kate and co, speaking to them about the things that matter to you outside of the technology. And, great recruiters like Kate will listen to not just the technologies you want to work with, but the teams you want to work with and the people you want to work with, because they're just as important, especially in leadership roles. The higher you go up in leadership, unfortunately, the less and less the technology has to matter to you in terms of what particular technologies it is, because the less and less time you actually spend directly interacting with it. If you think about hierarchies aren't everything, but it is a fact that there are less people in leadership positions than non-leadership positions. So that means that, there's less opportunities in leadership than non-leadership. So you have to be, a little bit less selective, but choose the things that you're not selective on. And it sounds to me that the people around you, the support that you get is more important, which might mean you maybe have to give a little bit on something like technology, because at the end of the day, no job role is perfect. Which things are you willing to compromise on, and which things are you, no, I must have this. And that's where a good recruiter can help you with that. The other thing I would say is speak to people around, speak to people in the industry, spend time in the meetup community, talk to people. Recruitment isn't a transactional process, or shouldn't be a transactional process. It should be a relationship-driven one. The bad news is that takes time. The good news is that means you actually get what you want at the end of it. So get out there, speak to people, build your network, find great recruiters, and invest the time. If you're reducing the number of roles that you apply for, the time that you can spend really truly understanding them goes up. If all you're doing is just going on to Seek and going apply, you're not investing the time in understanding if that role is right for you. Whereas if you go, no, I'm going to reduce the number of roles I apply for, you can do that either by going through a recruiter or invest in the time yourself by investing and learning and investigating the company. Does that help?
I think very much. In fact, this enlightens me a lot more also on the role of the recruiter and how to approach them.
Perfect.
I'd also add, like anyone here, you want to keep your message really clear. Like if you want to connect with other leaders, just saying to your recruiter or to Andrew or your friend, oh, I want to meet other leaders isn't really enough. Like you probably want to say, I'm really passionate about learning more about servant leadership, or I want to lead with empathy. Do you know anyone I can connect with? And then that's going to stick in my mind. Oh yeah, Moen, I'll introduce him to Sally. And same when you're at a meetup, just saying I'm looking to connect with other leaders. It's probably not enough. There's a lot of people on this call. They're going to remember you by something a little bit more specific. So maybe think about what it is that you want to learn from these other leaders.
Yeah.
Just my 2 cents.
No, that's great. That's great.
And Stefan.
Oh, sorry. Before we do that, I just want to inject. So I actually put together a little workbook on how to improve your CV. So I'm just going to post a link to that, in the chat. Not to Kate directly, but everybody. So this is just a little workbook, which we'll talk about some of those things that Kate talked about in terms of, how do you show what you want from your role? How do you show, your best light? So there's a lot of stuff in there which should help with that if you're going through this recruitment process at the moment. Yep.
Hey, Andrew, great advice. The sort of thought going in my head and probably relevant to what we're doing at the moment. How does any of it change with remote teams? Like, do you sort of have any sort of specifics around changing that? Any of the advice or practices if you're dealing with the majority remote teams?
Sure. So fundamentally, humans are humans. Whether we're remote or in person, we're all humans, and so the same fundamental skills apply. The focus on where to accentuate the different aspects might change. So, for example, communication becomes really important remote, and so improving your communication skills when you're dealing with a remote team is even more important. If we think about, for example, face-to-face communication, like you at the moment you can't see below here. So you can't see what body posture I'm in. You can't see, you can maybe, if I really accentuate the body posture, you can maybe see what I'm doing, but you lose a lot of information when we do video conferences, and even more information when we do phone calls and email messages and Slack. So communication is really, really key, and being aware that we're losing a lot of data when we communicate remotely. And so we've got to find ways to put that back in. So each of the skills is the same, but the focus that we put on them and the area in which we focus within them is going to shift. So communication becomes more about data and making sure we don't lose data. Influence becomes a lot more strategic. Building a team becomes a lot more important in terms of non-transactional conversations tend to not happen remotely. So by non-transactional, what I mean is, you just walk past somebody when you're going to make a coffee, or you saw somebody when you're going to the bathroom. Yeah, exactly. Hi, great to see you again. So these non-transactional things tend to not happen when we go remote. There's two downsides to that. The first downside is, we're not building these relationships as well as maybe we could, because relationships are all about social contracts, and social contracts are all about non-transactional conversations. So it's hard to build trust online. So we've got to do it. We've got to do it strategically. We've got to actually think about it, because it doesn't build as quickly as it would naturally. And so we've got to be more strategic about building trust. And secondly, non-transactional conversations are great for just finding out what's going on in people's lives, which are key to understanding them. And understanding them is how you get that, how you remove that gap between what you think is going on and what they think is going on. So communication, non-transactional conversations, those are the two most important things.
Thanks, Matt.
You're welcome, Stefan. Have we got time? Have we got time for the last one? We do. Cool. Awesome. Stuart, go for it.
Yeah, just I was hoping to pick your brain really as an expert on possible ways to move into these kind of positions as a developer.
Sure.
Just get some tips.
Sure. Two things on that. The first thing is just start doing it. Like, again, you don't have to be a leader in your job title to be a leader in your role. Just start doing it. See opportunities and just practice those skills. Emulate the person you want to be, and the role will happen eventually as long as you keep practicing, you keep learning, and you become better. So that's the first thing. The caveat to that, which is my second point, is quite often people's opinions of us are hard to change. And so if somebody has always viewed you as a particular way, it can take a very long time to change their opinion of you. And so you might do this, you might start just going, I'm just going to be a leader. I'm just going to start doing these things. I'm going to start improving my communication skills. I'm going to start influencing people. I'm going to take all of these responsibilities on and not get the progress you want because people's opinions of you are stuck where they were a year or two before. That might not happen, but it could. If it does, then that might be the time to start looking at moving on to another role, not because it's not the right fit for the person you were 2 years ago, but because it's not the right fit for the person you are today. And it's a lot easier to change people's opinions of you when they've never met you before. So those are my two pieces of advice. Just start doing it now. Start practicing these skills, start learning them, invest time in doing that. The good news is that it's not as hard as you think. So if you think about when you first started learning to be a technologist, if you think about 1 year of time when you were, what age did you start learning to be a technologist, Stuart?
For me, same as you really, about 8.
Sure. All right. So when you were 8 years old, the time that you spent from being 8 to being 9, think about how much you learned. I don't know how old you are now. Think about how much you learned in the last 12 months. How does that compare between those?
It's a lot more now.
Yeah. The fact is that your ability to learn is bigger, but also you can learn these skills so much better because, you're more mature, your mind is there, but also you haven't hit diminishing returns on it. We can quite easily hit diminishing returns on our hard skills because we know so much about it. Whereas we're nowhere near, most of us are nowhere near hitting diminishing returns on learning our kind of leadership and communication skills because we just haven't invested the time in it. And so, we're still in that maximum return for time investment. So it's honestly not as hard as people think. It just takes dedication and time. So start now, practice now, learn now. And if you're not getting anywhere, maybe it's time to think about moving because people's opinions aren't changing, but give it a go first.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
That was really powerful ending, but if you wanted to add some closing remarks, go for it.
I tell you what, you guys might not believe this, but I'm naturally an introvert. And so these kinds of events kind of take a lot of energy out of me. And so after this, I am going to go and I'm going to have a nice cup of coffee and I'm going to sit down and relax and chill out. And I say that because being an introvert doesn't stop you from being a leader. It doesn't stop you from being influential in your organization. Because we can learn all of these things as long as we understand the return on the investment of doing it. And so, you might think to yourself, these are skills which I'm not naturally good at. These are skills that I'm never going to learn. These are things that, it's just not in me to do them. And to all of those things, I say you're wrong. everybody can learn these things. For some people, it's easier than others, but everybody can learn them. And if you're going to improve what you do, if you're going to make your team happier, if you're going to make yourself happier, if you're going to make them more productive, you're going to make yourself more productive, these are the skills to learn, and these are the skills to invest. So I encourage everybody to do that, whether or not they've got the word lead in their job title. How was that for ending remarks?
Blew me away, as you do every time. This is just so, I have taken so many notes. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for your engagement. Like, this has been so wonderful, having everyone chat with your cameras on, in the chat box, verbally. Thank you so much.
Thank you. If anybody wants to connect to me on LinkedIn, please feel free to do that. I'm just going to do a very, very quick, I really should have prepared this. I am horrendous.
I'll put your LinkedIn. I'll send an email to everyone that came.
Thank you.
I'll put your LinkedIn in there and your notes and everything else we've talked about.
Please. Thank you very much. And thank you everybody for coming. This has been great. Reach out to me, talk to me. I'm happy to, any of those issues which we didn't maybe nail and you want to spend a bit more time, please reach out to me and we'll have a chat.